Okay, so The Long Queen is the first poem in the collection. I would say probably one of the most well known. It's certainly one which there are more resources of than many of the other poems in the collection. So I'm going to try make this interesting and hopefully a little bit different from some other resources which are out there on The Long Queen, but we'll see what you think. Now, I apologise, some of the pictures I'm going to show might be quite difficult to read because I've scanned them in from my notes and I realised that the colours might be difficult. So this is just a few of my favourite quotes, or rather a few of the quotes that I think are most important from poem. I also apologise if you can't read my handwriting, but we've got the quote, "couldn't die," and all I've done is annotate around it a few things. So couldn't die, you've got the idea that her bloodline will continue, you've got ideas of immortality, eternity, possibly she's a deity. Couldn't die suggesting long reign, suggesting she's powerful, perhaps preserved by legacy, highlighting her influence, and you've got a modal verb, the verb can. And there's also a key connection there with beautiful. Some flowers is another quote which I like. Sorry, saw flowers. As I said, my handwriting isn't always particularly clear, but you've got the idea of nature, but also the concept of pain. It's linking to beauty, fertility, perhaps suggesting that fertility is beautiful, but it's also quite an oxymoron. Saw is quite negative, flowers is quite positive, which I think sums up, this is in relation to childbirth, which I think sums up childbirth quite well. Not that I've gone through it myself, but some said is another important one, and again links to beautiful. This time the section on Helen of Troy, whereas couldn't die links to the section on Marilyn Monroe. So some said you've got the concept of fairy tales, the oral tradition, mythical ideas, and unsurety, not knowing. And it's also sibilant alliteration. Unseen, so she rules unseen. Just she's a distant monarch, recluse, isolated, separate from mortals if we're taking her as a deity. Apple, you've got the idea of importance. If you're the apple of someone's eye, as it refers to here, apple also links to the temptation of Eve and the concept of being fruitful, having children. The creaking ships. Again, you've got a potential link to beautiful, the ships which Menelaus and his army set out on in their search to find Helen. The idea of travelling through history, setting out to war, and potentially quite sexual imagery. You could have the creaking ships as effectively a metaphor for sex. And then the last line of the poem, you've got this, the moment of time, and that to me really links in with the idea of history and herstory. History and her story. And I think this poem really sets up that history versus herstory theme really well for the poem. This, I done a mind map of the majority of our queens. So the two I'm missing are Anna Gloria and Mary, the wife of William. I haven't done those because if we're realistic they have less influence in our history. They're people I don't know a lot about them as well. Jane, Lady Jane Grey, that is Queen Jane. Of course, she only ruled for 9 days, but she was actually the first Queen of England to rule without a king. So obviously, like Henry VIII's wives would have been queen, but Jane was the first queen to rule in her own right, even if it was only for 9 days. And she is often missed off the list of monarchs we've had. And you've got the fact that she ultimately only ruled for 9 days. It really contrasts with the fact of the long queen in this poem who's ruled for a long time. But something I wanted to note is how she was hidden in the tower. She ruled unseen. She stayed in the Tower of London for those 9 days, actually barricaded herself in, and she also refused to submit to male power. So she was under pressure from the Duke of Northumberland to marry Gilbert. But she refused, or she married Gilbert, but she then refused to make him a prince. So Jane being brought to the throne provoked an ascension crisis. And you've also got to remember that Jane was only 15 at the time. So Jane, that provoked an ascension crisis, and then got Mary I. So Mary I, commonly known as Bloody Mary, she took a strong stance to ensure she became queen. Effectively, she waged war on Jane, which really does, again, contradict with that idea of a passive queen fitting in with the long queen in the poem. She ruled for 5 years, so not a particularly long time. She ascended when she was 37, so not particularly young, because that's the other thing we know about the queen in the poem, that she was young, and she had no children. It was followed by Queen Elizabeth I. And Queen Elizabeth I, she was only 23 when she ascended, and she ruled for 45 years. She's also known as the Virgin Queen, and a lot of suggestions have been that she might be the basis of the Long Queen. And these three, they were all queens as more than a figurehead, whereas Queen Elizabeth II and Victoria have effectively been figureheads. So Queen Victoria ascended the throne at 18. She was again young, and she ruled for 63 years. She had 9 children, so she wasn't a virgin, clearly, but she did certainly want to portray herself as mother of the nation. But she was quite influenced by men. She wanted Albert to be a king. She wasn't actually allowed to make him a king, but that's what she wanted. She was queen at the time of the British Empire being built up, the Industrial Revolution, and she was actually a recluse for about 40 years. After Prince Albert died. And then Queen Elizabeth II, who clearly is queen now. She has so far been queen for over 65 years, so celebrating her Sapphire Jubilee. She's seen as a monarch of the people. She gives a yearly speech, her Christmas address, and obviously she does so much more. She married Philip when she was 21 and ascended the throne again aged 25, so she was really quite young. Contrary to Victoria, she ruled over decolonisation. And also under Queen Elizabeth II, we've had the important change to the Ascension, which means that Princess Charlotte stays above her younger brother in the Ascension. So that's looking really at wider context. You might not think it's relevant, but there are lots of links that you can make between the persona of the Long Queen in this poem and these queens who've ruled in history. I've then highlighted, well, obviously this is the first one of the collection, but the 4 laws which are laid out: childhood, blood, tears, childbirth. I'm just going to read through what I've written and perhaps explain it if there's anything I want to expand upon. So childhood is important. There are 4 examples given of childhood. So the girl who awoke from a bad dream of the worst, another who swooned into memory, one who was bereaved and breast, one who wrote it all down like a charge sheet, or the 4th who never left scouring the markets and shops for her old books and toys. So it's important, but there are also ideas of sadness. You've got the nightmares, which I remember. And this is the one activity out of the 4 laws which is actually shared by both genders. It's the first law, so you could argue it's the most important, but obviously also childhood is the first thing which a girl goes through out of the 4. There's the idea of a desire to stay young, but also work seems to be penetrating childhood even. The idea of a charge sheet, to me, at least thinks of work, and obviously through time childhood has often featured work. Possibility of rigid schooling, or comparing to the idea of rigid schooling, never being able to grow up, the 4th who never left scouring the markets and shops because she wanted to stay young. On being unable to give up your past, link there to the map woman. Suggestion that they are all important to the Queen. So they are known as the apple of the Long Queen's eye. And the apple of my eye is first seen, apart from in biblical passages, in 885 AD. So Shakespeare uses it in Midsummer Night's Dream. It's quite an idiom. Another place where it's used, the final chapter of Jane Eyre, and it has 4 significant links in the Bible. So there's Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 10, Psalm chapter 17 verse 8, Proverbs chapter 7 verse 2, and Zechariah chapter 2 verse 8. And that's an important connection to literature through time, as well as bringing in those ideas of temptation which we looked at here. So you've got the idea that you're being watched over, protected, as they apple the fall of Eve, which suggests that the young are afflicted by the destruction of innocence. So the blood, interesting that it is blood rather than saying period, suggesting in that that is a taboo subject, and it has to be alluded to. So you've got the proof of royalty, fertility, the importance of continuing the bloodline, but subversion of the normal male line of inheritance. I usually think of bloodlines as going down the male side. If you do look in the Bible, there are lots of genealogies, and each of those genealogies is very much so-and-so was the father of so-and-so, who was the father of so-and-so, with occasional references to wives, but it follows father, son, father, son. You've got the idea, it's regular, it's linked to the moon. The moon is a traditional feminine image. You've got medieval ideas coming in, with the idea that it is linked to the moon. Red is the colour which defines all women. You've got this suggestion, it's a good connection potentially if you're studying it alongside The Handmaid's Tale. One of my favourite, or I haven't actually included this, my favourite quote, but a quote which I think is really important, is the idea that it bled to be insignificant. It suggests perhaps that once a girl has had her first period, she isn't important, showing that females aren't important. I find that a really interesting idea. And this, the idea of classifying the period itself as unimportant, because it's one of the classifications for being a female, as lined out, is one of those rules. So you've got questions of woman as inferior, the paradox of importance, and the innocence of a girl. No positive to compare to the pain of bleeding. And then the idea that we're being instructed to accept it. Tears. So there are two sort of ideas that you can look at with tears. One of them would just be the sorrow of life and accepting that sorrow. If so, then you can apply it to both a male and a female. But it seems the idea that you've got till middle age when the law would change before it, tears to me sounds like the menopause, aging. But if it does refer to the menopause, it's placed before childbirth as a law. Tears themselves clearly are not exclusively feminine, but the menopause is. So there's a real contrast there. You've got the oxymoron of salt pearls, the bitterness of the salt with the precious pearls, beauty in bitterness. And I did actually sorrow can be beautiful. Possibly the sorrow is taken by the Long Queen, or the women are united in sorrow. Bright jewels, again, precious. Perhaps that our sorrows are precious to the so-called Long Queen. So talk about two different interpretations, double entendre. And does the Queen delight in our sorrow? Ideas of tearing, weakness, violence. It's quite a complex image. And then childbirth. So you've got the oxymoron of saw flowers, which we've looked at, painful beauty, necessary, possibly natural, flower imagery, idea of a female culture, the pain is worth it. Again, good links if you were studying this alongside The Handmaid's Tale. Undignified, idea of screamed scarlet. It's a very realistic image, highlighted by the sibilant alliteration, defined by blood. This is the final stage, childbirth. Clearly childbirth is exclusively female. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, obviously blood, it doesn't have to be a period. It could just be bleeding, which would be relevant to male and female. So childbirth is the only one that absolutely has to be exclusively female. So the female culture declared that pairing is worth it. It's undignified. Final stage, you've got plosive alliteration as well. Birthing beds. The idea that it's violent and uncomfortable. Roles of female, especially as role models. So you've got these lists: godmother, aunt, teacher, teller of tall tales. Sounds like it's quite a lot of effort. It's forced. It's dysphemic rather than there being euphemised. There's a direct focus on the Queen, representing femininity, inclusion of all oral tradition, possible lying about the pay by swearing that it's worth it. And again, the tall tale has hints of being a lie, basically. So this is a paragraph which I wrote when I was first studying the poem, and I can read you the response I got to it, so you can see whether you think it is worth hearing or not. So my teacher said that I had excellent links to political context. That was what we were focusing on. We were focusing on the context of the stanza. And you exhibit a strong grasp of how Duffy's inclusion of asyndetic listing works to belittle the importance of peerage, especially as the titles are not in the title case or capitalised for names. Okay, and then if I'll read through my paragraph. In the first stanza of The Long Queen, Duffy examines the role of rank in her use of asyndetic listing, a technique engaged in Duffy throughout the poem, notably also a technique engaged by Duffy throughout the collection. The Queen is the highest rank of British women, yet she looks at the heir to the Duke and the second son of the Earl, who may be viewed as unusually inferior. Again, deviation, the idea that obviously now it's much more acceptable to look at lower ranking people, including obviously commoners. Both William and Harry have gone to marry members of the public. Well, yeah, labelled our members. Through this, Duffy begins to examine the concept of female superiority, which was born from the second wave of feminism. So you've got the first wave of feminism, which focused mainly on the vote. Second wave of feminism came in the 1950s and 60s, and that's the one which you might associate with bra boning. This lies in a potentially important time when England had, obviously we still do have, a female monarch, which could further inspire as only the seventh queen to rule in her own right. Indeed, the feminist movement of the 20th century could be viewed as inevitable given the influence of Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II. By listing the ranks without reference to their place in the British hierarchy, there is a rank list of British hierarchy, which I'll put in the information below if you're interested in it. Duffy undermines the concept of peerage, which may be seen to have emerged from social change in post-war Britain. This has been illustrated by the House of Lords Act 1999, whereby the number of hereditary peers in the House of Lords has been reduced to 92. And the overall size, effectively halved. This act was a sign of British dismissal of the traditional right to political influence based on inheritance, and is reflected by Duffy in the rejection of all nobles in favour of time. Sorry about that. Notably, Duffy reasserts the obsolete concept of peerage by not capitalising their titles, hence reducing their importance, and amplifying female superiority with the capitalisation of Queen.